There's a house still standing from the last ice age, built entirely out of mammoth skulls. The people who built it were tropical, hairless, built for none of this. By every reasonable measure, they should have frozen before the walls were finished. They didn't. You're here reading this sentence because they didn't. The answer isn't one invention. It's five stacked on top of each other, and if any single one had failed, you wouldn't exist to wonder about it. That mammoth-bone house is one of them. A fire that was never allowed to fully die is another. Clothes sewn tight enough to trap your own body heat against your skin is a third. A weapon that changed the odds of a single thrown spear is a fourth. And one rule about who you did all of it with mattered more than the other four combined. Here's how bad it actually was. On average, the world was about 6 degrees colder than the one you live in now. Small-sounding number. Enormous difference. Ice sheets a mile thick buried most of Canada and northern Europe, reaching as far south as London and New York. Sea level sat over 400 feet lower than it does today, and you were built for exactly none of it. No fur, no claws, no natural insulation of any kind. So start with the simplest answer and the easiest one to underestimate. Fire. By this point, your ancestors had already been keeping fire alight for tens of thousands of years, not just lighting it when needed. Tending it constantly like a job nobody was allowed to quit. Carrying embers wrapped and protected from one camp to the next so a fire could be restarted without ever starting from nothing. Ice Age hearths show something else too. Dry fuel, stored deliberately inside shelters, kept ready before it was needed, not gathered in a panic once the cold had already set in. That's not luck. That's forward planning built into daily life, generation after generation. Which brings us back to that house from the opening. The second answer is shelter, and that mammoth-bone house makes the point better than any description could. In what's now Ukraine, archaeologists excavated a structure your ancestors built almost entirely from mammoth bones. Skulls, stacked as a foundation. Tusks and long bones, curved into a load-bearing wall, likely covered over with hide or bark to seal it against wind. The largest of these, at a site called Measurage, has been directly dated to between roughly 18,200 and 17,700 years ago. If a house built from mammoth skulls is the kind of evidence that gets you, hit subscribe. The genetic side of this story is coming next. That's not a rough era. That's the single harshest stretch of the entire last ice age. Your ancestors weren't improvising out of desperation. They were engineering, with the only heavy building material the landscape had to offer. Bare skin loses heat fast, faster than almost anything else about a human body, which makes the third answer, clothing, less of a comfort and more of a precondition for existing at all. In Siberia, carved ivory figurines made roughly 23,000 years ago don't just show naked human forms the way most figurines from this era do. They show clothing, hats, footwear, bags slung across the body. Fitted, layered garments, carved in enough detail to show seams and shape, not just a rough covering thrown over the shoulders. Your ancestors were tailoring, not draping. The fourth answer is what you hunted and how you hunted it. Herds of mammoth, bison, reindeer, and woolly rhinoceros moved across the frozen plains in vast numbers, and following them meant food, fat, hide, bone, and sinew, all from one animal. Early on, hunting that meant getting close enough to thrust a spear by hand, a genuinely dangerous distance from something that size. Later, a new tool changed the calculation entirely. The spear thrower. A simple lever that added real range and force to a thrown spear without adding any extra risk to the person holding it. Small mechanical advantage. Large survival advantage, repeated on every single hunt for thousands of years. Here's the part almost nobody expects. None of the first four answers actually worked on their own. A fire tended alone goes out. A shelter built alone takes far longer and holds far less heat once it's finished. A mammoth herd is not something one person brings down, no matter how good the spear thrower is. Every single one of those four answers only functions at the scale of a group, sharing both the labor and the warmth. So the fifth answer isn't a tool or a technique or an invention at all. It's who your ancestors refused to do any of this alone. That's not a nice detail tacked onto the ending. It's the actual mechanism. Fire, shelter, clothing, and hunting all had to improve at once, carried together, because a group that shared the work was the only version of any of those four answers that could survive a real ice age winter. The individuals who tried to go it alone simply aren't your ancestors. They didn't leave descendants to wonder about any of this. The ones who did are the ones who never let the fire go out, never built the shelter alone, never hunted without people they trusted at their side. So the real answer to how did humans survive the Ice Age was never a single clever trick. It was a species that had already worked out, tens of thousands of years earlier, that depending on other people wasn't a weakness to root around. It was the actual technology. Everything else, the fire, the mammoth-bone house, the sewn clothing, the spear thrower, was just what that dependence looked like, built by hand, in the coldest place your ancestors had ever tried to live. If losing that fur in the first place is what put your ancestors in this position, that's a whole separate story, and it's one this channel's already told.
Ah, I understand. Follow, and see you next time. For another thing, you'll never look at the same way again.